As I was researching the previous video, the video that I published before this one, I came across something very interesting. And it's about the classification of the Somali language into, or the putting of the Somali language into the Cushitic group. The understanding that Somali language is a Cushitic language is a very recent phenomenon. And of course, it's not just Somali language, of course, it's all languages, especially African languages. The classifications are very recent, and I've done very many videos where I've tried to push back on the narrative that actually the Cushitic, Bantu, or Nilotic groupings are about the genetics of the people. And very many people have a problem with that statement, even when it's so clear that actually it has nothing to do with the genetics. It's all about the linguistics, the use of language. Of course, we could argue that the genetics follow the linguistics. That's an argument that can be had, or although even that has a limitation, of course. Now, before the 20th century, Somali was not considered to be a Cushitic language. Of course, you might be like, then what does that actually mean? It means that the classification was created late 19th, early 20th century. And when I was researching the previous video, I was looking at the oldest books that have been written about the Somali language. And I ran across an individual by the name Leo Reinist, who was an Austrian linguist. Now, he wrote a book, and I mentioned that book alongside many other books. And that book was about studying the structure of the Somali language. Now, this individual never really came to the Horn of Africa. That's the very interesting part of the story, actually. But he is the one who is called the father of Cushitic studies. Like, he's the one who really persuaded scholars and other linguists to consider Somali and other languages that today we know as Cushitic languages to be Cushitic languages. Before then, they were something else. Somali was in a different group, or was considered to be in a different, or a group with a different name. And I'm going to, of course, talk about that as well. Now, this guy lived between 1832 and 1919. He did a lot of study of the Somali language, Afar language, Saho, and Oromo languages. And of course, these languages today we know them as the primary Cushitic languages. But he was not the one who really came up with the word Cushitic. Of course, Kush comes from the Kush society that existed to the south of Egypt, which is in very many historical documents is mentioned, the Kush society, or we could say the monarchy or empire. And that's where the name comes from. And the person who decided that, of course, as I've said, the Kush is an empire that existed thousands of years. And at some point, it did even conquer Egypt. But the person who decided to take that name and call it the Horn of Africa is a gentleman who went by the name Ernest Renan. And he did this around 1850s. And for some reason, he decided the Horn of Africa should be called Kush, or he called it Kush. And it stuck. At that point, it was just about the land and maybe the people who live in that part of the land. But then it was this other individual, Reinish, who is the guy who decided we are going to call that name the linguistic group. But there was somebody else who had started to do a study of the languages that we know today as Cushitic languages. And this is somebody who went by the name, a German linguist by the name Carl Richard Lepsius. Lepsius is the one who started looking at the relationship between these different groups and figured out that these languages are likely closer than they are to other languages. At this point, Somali and Oromo were more or less put together in the same group as Arabic and Amhara, we could say, and those languages. They were, today we call them Afro-Asiatic. Of course, they are still in the same larger group, but that was that. Somali, Arabic, just put them in that one group, and that's it. But then Carl Richard Lepsius started looking at those other languages and decided there should be a subgroup, or most likely there is a subgroup under the Afro-Asiatic, even though they were not called Afro-Asiatic at that point. And he started trying to understand the relationship between these languages. But then it is Reinisch who actually now did a lot of work and pushed a lot this idea that these languages are Cushitic languages. Let's call them Cushitic languages, and they are related. And it stuck. And this is late 19th century, 1890s, around that time. Now, before the 20th century, the Afroasiatic languages were called Hemito-Semitic. And these are very not very appropriate naming of the group, because it is based on biblical understanding of humans. And there's nothing wrong, of course, with understanding humans through the biblical descriptions. The names come from Ham, who is a person in the Bible, and Shem in the Bible. These are descendants of Abraham, of course, that genealogy. And so they are mentioned in the Bible. And so when the linguist of 18th century, so maybe could say 19th, going back, they were understanding human society, and the Bible was a huge tool. It was a very important tool trying to understand history. It was taken very seriously. It's not like today, not that much. So to them, they were looking at the biblical description of human society, and that was the foundation. And so they arrived at Hemito-Semitic group, which is a Afro-Asiatic group today. Sometimes they will be called the Ethiopic languages. They will be called the Semitic adjacent languages. They will call Semitic languages. But then, of course, they came to be called Cushitic languages, increasingly starting the mid 20th century. And today, of course, nobody really questions it. It's like Somali's Cushitic, and that's it. And yeah, it's interesting because these are things that have happened very recently. That's not to say the languages are not related. It's just the classification and the discovery of how they are related. Those are my random thoughts.